In state and local government, tech upgrades aren't optional, they're essential. Whether it's improving digital services, protecting public data, or modernizing outdated systems, the demand for skilled IT professionals has never been higher. CBT Nuggets helps you stay ahead with affordable, on-demand IT training that's built for your schedule. Our short, practical videos and hands-on virtual labs make it easy to build real-world skills in networking, cybersecurity, cloud technologies, and more. You don't need expensive hardware or complicated setups, just a browser and the motivation to grow. Whether you're an IT admin, public service tech, or new to the field, CBT Nuggets gives you the tools to better support your team and your community. And with new content added regularly, there's always something relevant to learn. Join thousands of learners who are upgrading their skills and advancing their careers. Start your 7-day free trial today at cbtnuggets.com. Because smarter tech skills don't just help you, they help your whole community succeed.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
The true north, strong and free. That's one of the themes from King Charles's 20th visit to Canada this week and his first as the sitting monarch.
When my dear late mother addressed your predecessors 7 decades ago, she said that in that age and against the backdrop of international affairs, no nation could live unto itself. It is a source of great pride that in the following decades, Canada has continued to set an example to the world in her conduct and values as a force for good.
It was a quick but historic trip, and by most accounts, it served its purpose to show support for Canada's sovereignty amid annexation talk from our neighbors to the south. I'm Kris McCusker, and in this episode of The Big Story, we do a deep dive on the King's visit with someone who knows a lot about the royal family. Carolyn Harris is an historian, author, and royal commentator, and instructor in history at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. So what was your overall take on the visit?
What stood out for me is how Canadians from all walks of life came together to welcome the King and Queen. And King Charles III and Queen Camilla seemed very at ease in Canada. They were enjoying speaking with Canadians, whether they were speaking with political figures or vendors at the farmers market at Lansdowne Park. The King and Queen seemed very much at home in Canada, and they were being well received by Canadians.
Was there a concern or question maybe about what the crowds might be like ahead of this visit?
Oh, certainly. When we look back on some of the future King Charles III's tours as Prince of Wales, sometimes circumstances and even weather have had a strong impact on the size of the crowds. The first time Charles and Camilla, as Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall, visited Canada as a married couple in 2009, it was November, so the crowds were smaller. They faced some protesters in Montreal, where the Prince of Wales was meeting with the Black Watch Regiment. So there have been instances where the crowds have been sparser, where there has been more of a mixed reception. Subsequent royal tours by Charles and Camilla took place around Victoria Day or Canada Day, when the weather is better and there are public holidays and people are able to come out and cheer. I think the unique circumstances of this tour had an impact on the reception that the King and Queen received. It's King Charles III's first visit to Canada as King of Canada. He had visited 19 times as Prince of Wales, so he's well known to Canadians. But this was his first time as king. And also with the threats from the President of the United States to make Canada the 51st state, there has been a lot of emphasis on the political traditions and the history and the cultural traditions that make Canada distinct from the United States. So the monarchy is one of those traditions, going all the way back to when the Loyalists fled the American Revolutionary Wars. So we're seeing Canada's unique history being showcased.
I mean, just to be clear, there were some protesters, correct?
Yes. Yes, there were some protesters. You could see at Lansdowne Park, there were a few signs that said, "Not my king," or were otherwise protesting the royal visit. And that's to be expected, as many Canadians don't really think about the monarchy except when there's a big royal tour happening. And when a royal tour happens, that's when some of these debates and discussions take place regarding the future of the monarchy in Canada and its place in Canadian politics and history. So it's unsurprising that there were a few protesters there amidst the crowd who were there, peacefully sharing their views about this royal visit, as a royal visit always leads to discussions and debates of that kind.
Was there anything about it that felt similar or mirrored perhaps some of the visits by King Charles's mother, Queen Elizabeth?
Well, Queen Elizabeth II visited for key moments in Canadian history, whether it was the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959, her own openings of Parliament in 1957 and 1977, Expo 67 in 1967 and the Centennial of Confederation, the patriation of the Constitution. The Queen was there for key moments in Canadian history. And here in 2025, this feels like a key moment in Canadian history as Canada's sovereignty has been threatened. In terms of Charles's visits, his very first visit to Canada in 1970 with his parents, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, and his sister, Princess Anne, was to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Manitoba and the Northwest Territories. And certainly, this was a tour marking a historic occasion, but it was also responding to circumstances in the Cold War when there were concerns expressed in the United States regarding Canadian sovereignty over the Arctic, and a high-profile royal visit with the Queen and the heir to the throne and other members of the royal family, all visiting Tuktoyaktuk and Iqaluit and places that had not received a royal visit before, close to the Arctic Circle. That sent a very clear message of Canada's presence in the region. So there are parallels in terms of the historic significance of this moment, and also parallels in terms of affirming Canadian sovereignty.
I guess I just wonder because, Queen Elizabeth was much beloved by Canadians, and I guess I just wonder if King Charles got a similar reception.
Well, Queen Elizabeth II was widely admired for her devotion to her royal duties, her record-breaking 7-decade reign. So there were many people who admired Queen Elizabeth II personally who didn't necessarily support the monarchy in Canada. It's interesting to see that there were many people who opposed the monarchy during the Queen's reign, who wanted to see out the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, who didn't want that political change during her reign, but in the next reign. And after 70 years, it was difficult to imagine anyone else stepping into that role. But King Charles III has been more successful in his role than many people have anticipated. He's built on the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, and he's received a great deal of popular sympathy because of the loss of his parents, Prince Philip in 2021, and then the Queen in 2022, and then his own cancer diagnosis and that of his daughter-in-law, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. There's been a lot of concern for the King's health, and there's appreciation that he continues to carry out his royal duties to the best of his ability, even though he's been undergoing cancer treatment for a long period of time. Amidst the crowds outside the National War Memorial and the Senate building, there were people who called out, "Thanks for coming." There was a real appreciation that King Charles III had made his role as King of Canada a priority when there had been so many calls for there to be a public display of his role as King of Canada because of the threats from the United States.
Interesting. I want to ask you about the throne speech because, as I understand it, these are the prime minister's words, but there is influence, I guess, from the king as part of this throne speech. What about that part of it stood out for you? I mean, there were some words in there that came directly from Charles.
Yes, that opening greeting where King Charles expressed his affection for Canada, and he repeated the words he'd first stated in 2009 when he was in Newfoundland on that first trip to Canada with his wife Camilla, who is now the Queen, that back in 2009 he had said just that a little more of Canada seeps into my bloodstream on every visit and goes straight to my heart. So there was some very heartfelt admiration for Canada as a nation and the society that Canadians have created, and also him being very touched by the welcome he'd received. And in the land acknowledgement, he discussed how he is continuing to learn more about this Indigenous history. And there's parallels there to 2022 and the Platinum Jubilee tour by the future King Charles and Queen Camilla, where Charles, as Prince of Wales, said that he was there to listen to the experiences of Canadians and Indigenous peoples. And in a speech towards the end of the 2022 tour, he acknowledged the pain experienced by residential school survivors. So that process of, the Crown's role in reconciliation, the monarch's ability to bring people together and listen to their experiences, certainly that was there in those opening greetings before setting out the government's agenda and reading the government's words.
I felt a little bit as well that without naming U.S. President Donald Trump, he hinted, let's say, at the discussion around Canada being the 51st state and this, I guess, teasing that the U.S. president continues to do. And I was unclear whether or not that was, Mark Carney's words or if that was being reiterated by King Charles.
Well, certainly there was a theme to the tour of the True North, strong and free. That was written on the airplane as well, that brought the King to Canada. The King and his office would have approved the speech, but overall, this is the government's policy. The King and Prime Minister Mark Carney do know each other well from the Prime Minister's time as Governor of the Bank of England, so there is a rapport there. It's not the same as where we look at previous instances where a monarch has opened Parliament, where it's for Queen Elizabeth II in 1957. The tour was being organized by Louis Saint Laurent, who thought he would still be in power by the time of the opening of Parliament. Instead, it was John Diefenbaker, who was Prime Minister in 1957 when the opening of Parliament took place by Queen Elizabeth II. In this case, the tour had been organized quite quickly, and there was already a strong rapport between the King and the Prime Minister that allowed them to work together well.
Well, and the thing I found interesting, too, is that the U.S. president very clearly had an eye on what was happening because there was a post on social media shortly after King Charles left Canada. So that Donald Trump was keeping an eye on the visit, even if he didn't outright say so.
Yes, President Donald Trump pays very close attention to the royal family. He's often boasted that he's a great fan of the royal family, that his mother was Scottish, and so that's where he gained his admiration for the royal family. So we always see President Trump taking an interest in royal events, and he was very pleased when, on the advice of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, King Charles III, in his capacity as King of the United Kingdom, issued an invitation for a second state visit, which very rarely happens with world leaders. Also, President Trump made a big fuss over meeting Prince William, the Prince of Wales, at the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. So when the royal family's involved, President Trump takes a great deal of interest, even if he doesn't let on that he's following every event. He clearly pays close attention to what the royal family's doing.
In state and local government, tech upgrades aren't optional, they're essential. Whether it's improving digital services, protecting public data, or modernizing outdated systems, the demand for skilled IT professionals has never been higher. CBT Nuggets helps you stay ahead with affordable, on-demand IT training that's built for your schedule. Our short, practical videos and hands-on virtual labs make it easy to build real-world skills in networking, cybersecurity, cloud technologies, and more. You don't need expensive hardware or complicated setups, just a browser and the motivation to grow. Whether you're an IT admin, public service tech, or new to the field, CBT Nuggets gives you the tools to better support your team and your community. And with new content added regularly, there's always something relevant to learn. Join thousands of learners who are upgrading their skills and advancing their careers. Start your 7-day free trial today at cbtnuggets.com. Because smarter tech skills don't just help you, they help your whole community succeed.
It was a quick trip, 24 hours-ish, kind of a whirlwind. And you spoke a little about the king and the fact that he's undergoing cancer treatments. I also understand that Queen Camilla doesn't really like to fly, so interesting that they agreed to make this trip. Was there anything that you were expecting to see from them that didn't happen, or something that maybe normally happens on a visit like this that didn't happen this time?
Well, on a visit like this, we often see more visits to other regions of Canada, even on a shorter, more targeted royal tour. So if we look at 2022, in 3 days, the future King Charles and Queen Camilla managed to travel from St. John's to Ottawa to Yellowknife. And then in 2017, they were in Iqaluit, they were in Prince Edward County, and also the celebrations in Ottawa of the 150th anniversary of Confederation. So we've seen short royal tours in the past that have managed to cover a lot of geography, even if they don't last for very long. But it's clear that for this tour, the centerpiece of the tour was the opening of Parliament. So the focus was very much on Ottawa and the events that were unfolding there.
Given this situation now, I'm just curious, and given what you do for a living, is there still talk about abandoning the monarchy in this country, or has sort of Trump's rhetoric around the whole 51st state kind of reinvigorated our commitment to being a part of the Commonwealth?
Well, it's interesting to see that even when Commonwealth realms transition to being republics, as Barbados did in 2021, they remain part of the Commonwealth and acknowledge the monarch as head of the Commonwealth, just not as their head of state. So there have been instances of Commonwealth realms transitioning to being republics and remaining within the Commonwealth. And that was the case for India very soon after gaining independence. They were a constitutional monarchy where the viceroy became governor general for a period of time. And then in the early 1950s, they became a republic. And it was decided that republics might remain within the Commonwealth. So I think the Commonwealth ties will endure. In terms of Canada remaining a Commonwealth realm with the king as head of state, changing that system of government would be very difficult. All 10 provinces would have to agree, and it's very difficult to get all 10 provincial premiers on the same page about any issue, let alone the monarchy. We can see that from how the provinces addressed the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, that there were some provinces in the Maritimes who declared a day of mourning, some such as Ontario, that declared a moment of silence, and then Quebec, which did not have commemorations of that kind. So all the provinces would have to agree. And also in Canada, treaties with Indigenous peoples are with the Crown. So Indigenous peoples would need to be consulted about any change of that kind. And there'd probably be calls for a popular referendum. So I think formally changing the system of government is unlikely in the near future. What does sometimes change over time is the visibility of the royal family in Canada, that sometimes the constitutional monarchy as a system of government keeps going without a lot of royal visits. But with the current situation with the United States, we're seeing a renewed interest in the monarchy in Canada because this is a aspect of our political traditions and history that is distinct from that of the United States. And I think there's a lot of focus on what makes Canada distinctive. So there'd been a lot of speculation that the monarchy would gradually fade in the public consciousness with the accession of Charles III and perhaps there being fewer royal visits. And instead, we saw a lot of interest in what this particular royal visit means at this moment in 2025. Yes, there's history being celebrated, but the current political moment was also very important.
And something else of note.
Well, it was interesting to see that we see King Charles III wearing his Order of Canada, his Canadian decorations, and there was also interest in Queen Camilla's attire, as there's a long history of royal jewelry that comes from particular royal tours. We saw her maple leaf brooch that dates back from the 1939 royal tour, another very historically significant royal tour undertaken by King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, where the National War Memorial in Ottawa was dedicated. And the King and Queen at that time in 1939 had an impromptu walkabout, plunging into a crowd of First World War veterans. And that was highly significant on the eve of the Second World War. So that was another tour where political circumstances were very significant. And then at the opening of Parliament, we saw Queen Camilla wearing the Queen's own rifles brooch, which signifies the regiment where she has been Colonel-in-Chief in Canada since 2014. And that was the first instance where she was giving a speech by herself in Canada back in 2014 when she became Colonel-in-Chief of the Queen's Own Rifles. So we're seeing a great deal of symbolism. And Camilla was sworn in to the Privy Council here in Canada as well. So we're seeing a Canadian role for the Queen Consort as well.
Yeah, and that maple leaf brooch did belong to Queen Elizabeth, correct?
Yes, that these pieces are passed down within the family. There is an even older Canadian brooch that we didn't see, the maple leaf spray brooch that dates from 1901 when the future George V and Queen Mary traveled across Canada by train. So these pieces get passed down within the royal family. We see them in reign after reign, symbolizing that long history of the monarchy in Canada.
There are people that think about all of these things. It's their job. Everything that happened, that was worn, that was said, that was like it. There's careful consideration of everything.
Yes, there's a very strong focus on showcasing the king and queen in a Canadian context, because often when we think of King Charles and Queen Camilla, we think of the United Kingdom and Trooping the Colour and the various British traditions, like Order of the Garter, for instance, whereas in Canada, there was a very strong emphasis on them being escorted by Canadian regiments, by the RCMP, and there being Canadian symbolism all around them, because this is a distinct office. King Charles III is King of Canada, distinct from his role as King of the United Kingdom and King of the 13 other Commonwealth realms.
Well, and before he got on the plane, he went and thanked the police officers that were part of the detail.
Yes, we always see when royalty travel, they like to thank the people who made the tour a success. There's a wonderful photograph from 1959 where Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, on the last great whistle-stop tour of Canada, crossing the country by train, that they are posing in a photograph with the train staff and the porters and the various people who had looked after them during the 1959 tour.
Do you think at this point, is there any other trip that is planned or on the radar, or might it be Prince William and Kate perhaps? When might we get another visit from the royal family?
Well, certainly if William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, and their children visit Canada, that will attract a great deal of attention. They were well received in 2016 when they traveled in British Columbia and the Yukon, and they were accompanied on that tour by Prince George and Princess Charlotte. So if they travel with their family in particular, there will be a lot of interest. There may also be future royal tours if indeed a state visit to the United Kingdom from the United States takes place. There may be a return visit by King Charles III, and traditionally, royal visits to the United States follow royal visits to Canada, and that dates back to 1860 when Queen Victoria's eldest son, the future Edward VII, toured British North America, and then he visited the United States and visited President Buchanan at that time, and the handover took place at Niagara Falls. So often we see if there's an American visit, it follows a Canadian visit, and that was the case in 1939 as well when George VI and Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, visited Franklin Roosevelt at Hyde Park on Hudson. That was a few days carved out of a 6-week Canadian tour. So certainly if a visit to the United States takes place in the future, it's likely there will also be a visit to Canada. And then the question arises when the king arrives in the United States, is he traveling as King of the United Kingdom or King of Canada, as these are distinctive roles? So it will be a very delicate diplomatic situation in the future.
What does the king stand to gain from a trip like this?
A great deal of respect and esteem for his role as King of Canada. There had been a great deal of speculation that when the reign of Queen Elizabeth II came to an end, that while the United Kingdom might remain a monarchy, that the Commonwealth realms might gradually drift away. And King Charles III is showing that he is also taken very seriously in his role as King of Canada, and that this is likely to endure. So he's building on Queen Elizabeth II's legacy. We're also seeing a very strong emphasis during this tour on King Charles III's duties as a constitutional monarch. Sometimes coverage of the royal family focuses quite closely on their personal lives and how King Charles III is getting along with his sons at any given time, and personal dynamics within the royal family. And a tour like this one shows King Charles III as a constitutional monarch undertaking his duties. When we look at the royal family, we're not simply looking at a family saga, we're looking at a political institution.
It's all so very interesting. Thank you so much for doing this today. I really appreciate you taking time to do a deep dive on this visit.
Thank you.
Carolyn Harris is an historian, author, and royal commentator, and an instructor in history at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. And that wraps up another episode of The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. I'm Kris McCusker. Thanks for listening.
Feel like you're stuck in career limbo? Clock in, clock out, repeat. No growth, no new opportunities. It's time to break out and break into tech. With CBT Nuggets, you can start building the IT skills that companies are hiring for right now. We make training fast, simple, and practical. From networking to cybersecurity, you'll get short, easy-to-watch videos and hands-on virtual labs so you can build real-world skills without expensive gear or complicated setups. For just $59 a month, you get unlimited access to our full training library. That includes certifications, skill-based learning, and practice exams, a $100 value included free. Learn anytime, anywhere, and get job ready on your terms. Thousands have used CBT Nuggets to launch new careers, and you can too. Right now, CBT Nuggets is offering a free trial. Easily find the training you need and test it out with no commitment. Start your 7-day free trial now at cbtnuggets.com. Don't wait. A better job is just a few clicks away.